Welcome to Vesta. Our topic is before you file, key questions on the legal and emotional side that we're going to have. We have a nice panel tonight to answer those questions. So at Vesta, our mission is to provide education, connection, and support to help you navigate the divorce process with clarity and confidence. We just celebrated 13 years. Woohoo. Vesta began because the three founders wanted a better experience for those going through divorce. They went through it themselves and realized there has to be a better way, and that's how Vesta was born. So again, today's session is focused on key questions to ask before you file. A topic, of course, that can feel overwhelming, but it's critical to understand your options for your future stability and peace of mind. So welcome. As I mentioned, the chat has been disabled because it does not keep your anonymity. So we encourage you to ask questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A section. Feel free to ask as many questions as you like. Our panelists will be checking on those and answering the ones that they can. And there should be a poll launching, I think, Mandy, right? A poll coming. You'll see it pop up on your screen. We just like to get a feel for who is coming. There it is. Who's here tonight, so we can gear our presentation to the attendees. Again, it's all anonymous, so feel free to fill that out. So we have an experienced panel of professionals who are going to share their insights on preparing for divorce, covering everything from financial, pre and post divorce, and legal aspects, mortgages, real estate, as well as your emotional state. So keep in mind that on the legal side of things, this is a New Hampshire chapter for Vesta. So when our attorneys are speaking, they're going to be speaking on New Hampshire law. The other professionals in the group likely work outside of New Hampshire, but just keep in mind on the legal side that it is New Hampshire based. But feel free to check out Vesta's website. We cover lots of other states, and there are attorneys available in several other states. So at Vesta, all of the professionals here volunteer our time. So we don't work directly for Vesta. We all have our own businesses, but we volunteer through Vesta so that we can help you prepare for your divorce. Take notes, stay engaged, use the Q&A. I want to first introduce our concierge, Mandy Barr. She can tell you a little bit more about what the concierge does to help in the process.
Thank you so much, Renee. Hi, everybody. My name is Mandy. I am a concierge specialist with Vesta. I celebrated 6 years with the organization in January, and it really is a privilege and an honor to be able to speak with individuals as they're navigating the divorce process. And really what we do is we listen and we help build a team for you so that you can get to the other side of this in the best way possible. And that may look like working with this entire dynamic team of individuals, or it may mean just working with one or two. And we figure that out when we talk and I listen to your particular case. I do this work because I went through my own divorce 18 years ago, which is just mind blowing. And 3 years post-divorce, I had to file for bankruptcy because I didn't realize that I was entitled to certain things and I didn't know how to manage my money. I want to help people have a better outcome, and that's why I do the work. So you're going to hear from these dynamic people who are filled with valuable information. Like Renee said, take some notes. Listen, this is being recorded and we will share it with you. So enjoy tonight's presentation and we look forward to speaking with you. Either myself or one of my colleagues will be calling tomorrow to get to know you. Thank you.
Mandy? All right. I think we're going to get started, and we are going to start with, I believe Michelle is going first.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're staying warm. I have a couple sweaters on. It's so cold. So I'm a certified divorce coach. I am someone that can work with you from pre-divorce. Maybe you're contemplating divorce, which is where we're at during this call today, during divorce, after divorce. Today, I'm talking and focusing more on some of the emotional pieces. A divorce coach is more than emotional. They help you get organized, stay organized. They can help you make sure you have the right resources Sometimes people think the coach is just here for the emotional pieces, but it's key to have someone there throughout the whole divorce that can help you manage the whole process, help you understand. And sometimes your emotions, as I'm about to go into, kind of come and go. You go through a roller coaster, it changes. Anxiety might crop up at certain times, and a coach is someone there to always be there for you the whole time, help you think things through and make the best decisions for yourself and your family. So tonight we're talking about key questions and considerations for divorce. And so some of the things when you're considering divorce to think about is, what's making me even consider divorce? Is it like a temporary issue or a temporary unhappiness that, could be resolved in another manner? Have you clearly communicated your concerns with your partner? Many times, and I'm sure many of us on this call are guilty of it, we think we've communicated something, one of our concerns within our relationship, and we just haven't clearly communicated it. So a lot of times it requires an actual sit down. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I would like in our relationship and our marriage. And to be very open and honest and vulnerable in these conversations. Sometimes we find we just make a passing comment. I know when I look back on my first marriage, I hear myself saying things and I do question, did I actually explicitly, go over my concerns and what I really need from this relationship in order for us to continue and improve our relationship? Sometimes there's just bumps in our marriages. So is it something temporary that can require turning towards each other a little bit more during those hard times and really communicating to get through it? Sometimes it was an infidelity. Are you able to rebuild that trust before you just go straight to divorce? I think Adrian might get a little bit more into abusive relationships. Obviously, a great concern for considering divorce. Do you still love your partner? Do you really truly believe you'll be happier without your partner? And in some cases, the answer is definitely yes, if we go back to abuse and some other things. What do you hope to achieve with the divorce? So again, these are a lot of the questions like to sit down and really ask yourself if you're contemplating divorce. Why are you contemplating divorce? Have you made real efforts, done real communication with your partner? How will your children potentially be affected? And Adrian will go into that a little deeper later in the webinar. And are you ready for the changes divorce will bring? And so working with a coach like myself also helps you to process some of these questions to get to the answers that you're looking for in making the best decision for you and your relationship. There are stages, emotional stages to divorce, just like anything. And grief isn't up here, but grief is a huge one. If you do decide to move forward with a divorce, grief is a big part of a divorce. It's an ending to a relationship, the future you thought you might have, your current day-to-day will change, maybe your living arrangements, when you see your kids, things like that. But these are the stages of divorce that people go in and out of. Some people go in and out of all of them, some people none. You can go through many of them in one day. There's no specific order, but sometimes you'll see in yourself or your partner denial. Was this really happening? And trying to avoid the topic. Anger towards yourself. Why did I wait so long? Or why is this happening to me? Trying to rationalize some of the decisions with yourself. Bargaining, I promise I'll put the dishes in the dishwasher if you'll stay, things like that. And then depression, sadness, all of those that people experience, like I went over, the grief and the loss of the relationship. And then hopefully you'll move into acceptance where you're ready to move on. And a lot of times moving on and moving forward doesn't always mean that you have closed all the open questions. Sometimes it's moving on without having all the answers that we would like to have had in our relationship. Thanks. So next is Barb to talk about some of the finances.
Good evening, everyone. So, my name is Barb Shigag. I am a certified divorce financial analyst. I work with clients considering divorce, in the throes of the divorce, and a little bit in post divorce. But as you'll see from our presentation tonight, mostly preparing them to turn them over to Rachel. What I'd like to talk to you tonight about is preparing for divorce. When I meet with clients that say, I'm thinking about getting divorced, but I don't know what to expect. How can I prepare? This is the first question they're going to ask me is, can I afford the divorce? Now, I never want anyone, if they're in a uncomfortable relationship, to use finances as a means to not get divorced or not proceed forward, because if the relationship is not something that is sustainable, then I can help you and a team can help you figure out how to make it work. Not affording a divorce isn't really a good reason to stay in an unhappy marriage, but it is important that you understand what it may mean when you do get a divorce. When you're divorced, you're taking what could be two or one income, and now you're having to maintain two households. So, what should you do to prepare? The most important thing you can do is make a list of all of the facts of the marriage. So, whether you meet with me or you have a consult with an attorney, the more information that you can give them a fact sheet, the better off they would be able to help you. And I always provide a complimentary 30-minute consultation. And I know most other attorneys in Vesta, my colleagues in Vesta, provide that also. So make the most out of that 30 minutes, because you only get one set of 30 minutes. And even some attorneys you have to pay. It makes, if you do, then you really want to come with all of the facts of the marriage laid out. Do you have kids? Do you own a home? Give them a general idea of what your asset profile looks like. And then make a list of any questions that you have as it relates to to getting divorced. And these could also be factors such as, how does this work or how does that work? But I would use your 30 minutes sticking to your facts, honestly, most of all, and what the thoughts are. Another really important first step is to become familiar with the required disclosures. Each state has required disclosures that you have to get from your spouse to move forward in the divorce process. In New Hampshire, it's called Rule 1.25A. In Massachusetts, it's called 410 disclosure. So this is all of the documents that are required to be given to you by the state. And it's important because you may find that your spouse doesn't want to be forthcoming with information. So it's important to understand the law and what is required under the law. And you can just Google it, Rule 1.25A, or New Hampshire or Mass or Maine, New York disclosures for filing for divorce. Something else that's really critical is understanding what your monthly expenses are and having understanding, because this is critical. If, for example, someone will come to me, I really want to stay in the house. I don't know if I can afford it. And I said, what's the monthly mortgage? I'm not really sure because I don't pay the bills. So becoming familiar with what your monthly expenses are is really critical. And I will tell you that all of the states require you to prepare a budget as part of their financial disclosure. So you're going to have to do it anyway. So you might as well do it at the beginning of the process to really understand what your needs are. And then after you do all that is organize your financials. So if you haven't left or your spouse hasn't left, really start to do some digging. If you have access to someone's login, you want to make sure that you do a little bit of sleuthing and start getting all of your documents. And even your marriage certificate, you need to know what's on your marriage certificate. So you might as well dig that out. Some people have their middle name, some people don't. You need to know that. So whatever documentation you can get a hold of, if you feel that you're not sure of it. Some couples, their information was a lot of it's joint. They're both on the accounts. So you may have some of it, but whatever you can possibly get makes sense. You'll need, I can assure you, anything that you can think of, you will need it. And I think the other thing that you really have to remember when you're preparing for divorce is even if you have a lot, you're going to have half. So prepare for that. And also prepare for if your spouse is the working spouse, they're going to say, you're going to take half of my 401k. It's not their 401k, it's the marital assets 401k. Just be prepared for things like that, that one spouse may feel that certain things are theirs because it's in their name. And just because it's in their name doesn't mean it's not a marital asset. So just prepare for that and get ready to, what is my life going to look like when we have half? All right. So for in the asset division, a lot of people come to me at the very beginning wondering what their asset division is going to look like. One thing that's really important is the asset division is final. There's no whoopsie, I didn't realize that, or I should have thought of that. So I always encourage you to double and triple check it. I do a lot of reviews. People just come to me with a couple hours. What do you think of this settlement? And I may find, oh, this is great, but do you know it has a huge gain and this isn't really worth 100,000. It's really only worth 40,000 after you pay the gain, or you have to pay taxes on this. So it's always important to double and triple check your settlement. If you're going with a mediator, have an attorney review it, have a CDFA review it, because it is final. I also get a question, are the home and retirement equal assets? And the answer is no, they're not equal. If you are, let's say, 50 plus, then it's a gray line if they are equal. But the home itself, the primary home, has a lot of tax benefits. You can take a $250,000 gain exclusion. So you're only paying taxes on the gain in the house over 250. Retirement assets, you're going to have to pay taxes on these no matter what. So they're 100,000 in retirement assets technically is really only worth 75, 80,000 depending on what your tax bracket is. Now, retirement assets they're great assets to have because they grow tax deferred. So if you are younger, then you could say the benefit of having this tax deferred income also counts. So it's a little bit of a gray area depending on when you are going to retire, because there is a benefit to tax deferred assets. But on the surface, they are not equal assets. And it's just really important, even when you go meet with an attorney or you meet with a CDFA, if you just have a list of all the assets you have, any debts you may have, it's important to make sure you're noted. It's also important to think about any inheritances you may have, what you may have brought into the marriage, especially if it's a second marriage or you're getting married later in life. If you brought a house, it's important to document what those things might have been worth on the day you got married. You know, what your retirement account was worth when you got married, what a house was worth when you got married. Because certainly you can make an argument things you brought into the marriage could possibly be non-marital assets. The quadro is a way that assets are split. So this would be, then there was a question on how do you divide your assets? It's actually a pretty easy process, easy in meaning that it's it's an easier thing to do in a very difficult process. So if you have a 401k and you get half of, let's say, that 401k through the settlement agreement, you would need a quadro to split that asset. If you have checking accounts, if you have brokerage accounts, if you have IRA accounts, all you need is the divorce decree and the accounts can be split. There's no tax consequences of splitting accounts. So if you have a brokerage account and there's 100,000 in assets in it, literally 50,000 of the assets, and you're dividing it, 50,000 of the assets just get transferred right to another account. There's no selling, it just everything moves over. And then the other thing is you have to decide what's the price of peace. What am I willing to let go so that this continues to move forward? Because in a mediation, everyone feels like they're giving up more than the others. And in fact, that's a successful mediation. So what you really want to do is decide beforehand, what is your price of peace? What am I willing to give up to keep this division moving forward? I'm going to put my contact information in the chat, and if anyone would like to have a complimentary consultation or would even just like my checklist of what to consider when you're thinking about getting divorced, I'm happy to send that off to you. So I will now turn it over to Rachel to talk about after the divorce.
Thanks, Barb. Hi, I'm Rachel D. Carolis. I'm a certified financial planner and a wealth manager at North Star Financial Planning. We're a wealth management firm in Southern New Hampshire. We primarily work with clients going through major life transitions, a lot of that being a divorce, helping them navigate their new normal after such a big change to their life and to their future, making sure everything is aligned financially for them. So, for someone considering filing for divorce, it can seem a little crazy to start to plan for life after divorce. You're like, I haven't even filed yet. But I think understanding what happens after the divorce is final and then starting to vision what your life may look like post-divorce, it can really help create some clarity and confidence as you begin the process, as you file and start to make some of these really big decisions. So on the financial side, as Barb alluded to, there's a number of things that will happen once that divorce is final. So things such as retitling accounts, rolling over retirement plans. We see a lot of account consolidation happening at this time. We're trying to simplify. The last thing someone needs is a whole bunch of accounts scattered all over the place. So trying to keep things as simple as possible. You're also going to be updating or potentially adding insurance coverage, and of course, updating your estate plan for no longer being married. So these are administrative steps, but they're really important. They're critical, actually, because if any mistakes here or any improper planning can really create a big mess down the road. So next becomes you're really rebuilding a financial plan for yourself and a vision that reflects your new reality. So income may be different, expenses are almost always different. Your risk tolerance can change, or perhaps you didn't know what your risk tolerance was before, which is also okay and typical. So you're figuring this out for the first time. And priorities often shift too. This part of the process is really getting answers to the question of what does my financial stability look like now and going forward for me? So here are some important questions to ask yourself before filing. So think about what financial independence means personally for you. So this isn't just what feels fair today. For some people, financial independence could mean being prepared for an emergency or having the ability to provide for a loved one or just simply not having to worry or lose sleep about their finances. Also think about what trade-offs are you willing or not willing to make. Again, Barb talked a little bit about this of we're all asking for and giving up things as you're navigating through this process. During a divorce, we often see that people will sometimes make short-term
decisions to reduce stress that later can create a problem. So some examples of this are keeping a house you can't afford, which we're going to be talking about shortly, or potentially agreeing to a less than favorable settlement just because you want to avoid having a difficult conversation or just want to get it over with. That's very common as well. Being thoughtful ahead of filing will just help you make these decisions as you get into the thick of things. If you're employed, obviously thinking how will divorcing impact your retirement timeline? It most likely will. And just being prepared for that or knowing what you may need to do to stay on the timeline. Thinking about what are my risks and how can I protect myself as well as what I think is most importantly is who is on my team that is helping me think long term. It's just, again, having that right group of support around you to help you navigate all of these decisions. So again, just to reiterate, thinking about your long-term vision now is really important because it's going to help you align these legal decisions that you have to make with your long-term goals. It's going to help you really prioritize what really matters to you. And I think by doing this visioning ahead of time, it's going to help provide more of an objective voice once you get into it, once the emotions are really running high. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. Laura Gamache. I'm a residential real estate broker licensed in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Just definitely work with a lot of people that are transitioning through this kind of life-changing event. So definitely a lot of questions that come up in this kind of sector where like the more you get us involved, the earlier in can definitely be most easiest transition, hopefully, that it can be at this process. First and foremost, when it comes down to it, is a lot of the times that the family home can be the most valuable asset. So no matter where you are in the process, just thinking about it, you're in the thick of it, your posts, everybody really needs to know the value of your property. Sometimes people have multiple properties. So a lot of discussion comes around it of really the monetary aspect of that. So really knowing first and foremost what that dollar amount is of that property is crucial. So if you're contemplating it, a lot of times if we can have that discussion earlier on, pull me in, somebody of this nature to have that discussion of what that number looked like, because you go heading into a lot of these numbers that everybody has discussed ahead of time, you need to know what these dollar amount look like. So that is first and foremost of having that right off the bat of having that knowledgeable information about the property. Next, of course, is just what's going to happen with the marital property, right? Is someone going to buy somebody out? You're going to be selling the property altogether, joining it, owning it together for some period of time. So there's many options that can happen around it, but just knowing what your options look like. The biggest kind of crucial thing that we'll probably hit home tonight on is if you are thinking that you own a property and you want to buy your party, your spouse, in terms for buy them out of the property, that is probably one of the most crucial topics that myself and Renee, who's up next, will discuss this evening about. There are many things you need to do ahead of time before you can jump to that conclusion. So that is another huge indicator and key factor that we need to really have a conversation and discuss before that is on the table for discussion. I'll jump into that more so in a second. Just knowing the options as well, the pros and the cons, right? So if you want to buy, you can, if you're going to own the home, sell the home, there's many pros and cons to both, right? So if you're looking into buying the marital home, a lot of the times you need to really dive deep into, which some people really haven't handled the financials of what does your total living expenses look like, right? So if you're going from a dual income, it's now a single income, right? What does that look like, right? So you need to really look at now the financials that Barbara's put together for you. You've given to Renee to look like in from the mortgage perspective. And then now we know what to do around this. So what is your total living expenses now once you're after divorce? And what does that kind of really setting up like Rachel just laid out as well too, of laying out after that, of having making sure that you are in a good financial position. And the question, of course, is can you afford the house? There are many people that have not pulled us into the mix fast enough. They've negotiated like, I'm going to have the house. I'm going to buy my spouse out of the property, buy them out, et cetera, take it over, et cetera. And they've negotiated that with the attorney and we find out, long story short, that they actually just don't qualify to be able to do that. And now they put themselves in a huge pickle, so to say, and now they're in a very tricky position. So again, backing up to the sooner you bring us in the mix and having those discussions to make sure that can you actually afford that with your income to be able to afford the principal, interest, taxes, insurance of the property. That is first and foremost. Lastly, or a couple of the other ones is just the impact of deferred maintenance of the property. Is there something that needs to be that hasn't been done to the property for a while that we need to factor into the mix with a divorce, and just keeping in mind the upkeep and maintaining of the house, right? So just making sure that you're in full awareness of what needs to be happening to the property while of course, if you're taking the ownership of keeping that property, utilities and all of the bills, I have to say, the heating and all the other expenses. Barb touched on, of course, the capital gain taxes when at some point when you actually do if property go to selling the property, you're no longer married, you're a single, so that whole tax, but there's a lot of different things that kind of come into the mix along with that. If we are thinking of now the property will have to be going to the selling of the marital property, like it focused in, of course, is it's always knowing what the value is, right? So first and foremost, always consult with a consultant. Okay. Zillow is not a consultant. Let's just throw it on the table. Okay. So Zillow is great for a basic little threshold, right? It is not going to give you the negotiating power that you need if you're going to be considering going into a divorce, right? You need to have an expert. So if you're not having your free market analysis done by a real estate agent, a lot of people, they have to go a step further and they actually need to have an appraisal done, which you're paying an appraiser to come out, which is hundreds of dollars. And a lot of times we're having multiple appraisals done because they're arguing the value. So first and foremost is really making sure we have that information done by however it's going to be done, whether it's provided by a real estate agent, it's done by an appraisal. You need to have that because sometimes we're negotiating what that looks like. The timing of the market, right? We need to know where are we? What does that look like, right? Are we in the middle of the winter months and we have 2 feet around us of snow? Are we in the spring, summer months? So it's a kind of that really plays a factor of sometimes on where we need to also factor that in. New England, we are still in a very strong seller's market. So if we are thinking around that, which is great. So we're factoring that into our timeline. Other parts of the country, it's very different. Their markets are very different. I cannot say that's a very strong seller's market. Some are very transitioning into more of a buyer's market versus a seller's market. That's also very crucial of keeping that in mind. If that's going to be a lot of the money's coming your way, you want to have that kind of factor that into when you're actually marketing the property. Preparing the home for the market. A lot of the times the house has not been a focus, right? And maintenance of the house because there's just been a lot of tension in the house, rightfully, of course, to be expected. So sometimes there's some things that we need to factor in of what we need to do to prepare the house for the market that will really be crucial for the sale. But then there also sometimes has to be some monetary discussions, right? Who's paying for what? Is that going to be factored in when the proceeds are split, et cetera? So a lot of time we're having a lot of discussions around that. Post-divorce living, of course, is where are you going to be living next? Right. So if you're going to be taking a lot of the lump sum from this house sale and you're going to be putting that into a purchase, into a rental, when we're in a market that sometimes finding housing can be a little challenging, sometimes we need to be moving that that ball along, so to say, early on as well. So we can make sure we're looking what those options look like as well. Very kind of big conversations. We need to really kind of make sure that we're looking and setting that no one likes to be homeless, as I always like to say. And then of course the contingencies, right? If we're making the sale contingent upon someone finding suitable housing, again, like I was just saying, that post-divorce living is that we're just trying to line things up accordingly. that there are ways that you can sell a house. Of course, people don't always realize that. There are ways you can put a property on the market for sale, but it is subject to you finding suitable housing, right? So we need to make sure that you can actually find something that is suitable for you to purchase, secure, and close, right? So that is just a very crucial piece that people need to make sure that they're not always aware of that. Yes, it is a contingency. So you need to find a buyer, of course, that's willing to wait so you can find something. But there it is a very common factor that we see out there because people, of course, they want to sell, but they need somewhere to go. But just making sure we have all of those discussions well in advance so no one likes surprises. And especially when it comes to around a very crucial topic when it comes to someone's their home and their next kind of steps. That's what I have for you. And I will put my info out there and I'll pass the baton over to Renee, who can kind of like tee you up for on the mortgages and financing side of it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everybody. Again, welcome. My name is Renee Coleman. I'm a residential mortgage lender and I'm a certified divorce lending professional. I'm also the founder of a company called Divorce Mortgage Planning of New England. So we help our clients understand all of their options pre and post divorce. So I want to just talk about a few things tonight. So we're talking about what questions and what things do we need to do to prepare for potentially filing for divorce. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about, sorry, can you go back one slide for me, Michelle? Can you go down another one? I'm missing a slide in there, but that's okay. I have my notes here. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about, both,
Sorry, I might have gone back to Laura's slides. Your slides are here.
okay, yeah, maybe it's back one more. Is there another one before that? Yes, that one. Thank you. So what I wanted to talk about was, so Rachel brought this up and Barb brought this up, a lot of documentation, right? We're gathering and gathering lots and lots of paperwork, understanding where all your assets are, what all the numbers are. And so when it comes to where are you going to live post-divorce, there's also a lot of paperwork required. So you may want to consider making multiple copies of things as you're preparing. Now, the good news is you're probably preparing to do your taxes now as well. So a lot of the documents that you might need, you're probably gathering those now anyway. So I just wanted to throw it out there. We're inventorying everything, right? So all of your assets, all of your liabilities. And so as you're seeing things come in the mail, make a few copies. Keep a few copies for yourself because you'll need it on the mortgage side of things as well. So when we're talking about evaluating your housing affordability early, like Laura said, the earlier you talk to Laura, the earlier you talk to me, the better off you will be. You need to understand all of your options. You may have an idea in your head. I would say most clients come to me with an idea. I have to keep the house, or I'm definitely not keeping the house, right? They usually have an idea of what they would like, but we really need to look at all of the options so you understand all of the financial possibilities for you. So keeping the house, selling the house, jointly owning the house for a time, that is a possibility. I will say, and Kate, our attorney, may touch on this, judges and courts are there to separate you. They're there to divide you. And so they don't necessarily like open-ended if you're going to own for a period of time jointly. So they would like an end date. For example, the kids have 2 more years of high school and then we'll sell the house. That's a reasonable reason for owning a house jointly for a particular period of time. So those things can be discussed. And then buying out a spouse, that's also part of the conversation, right? You're splitting all of your assets. And in the Northeast, we are fortunate. We had a lot of equity in our homes, but that equity is being split. And so what does that look like if there's the potential to have to buy out a spouse? So talking with us early, understanding all of your options, and we're splitting that asset, we have to put a value to that asset, right? That's where Laura comes in and she can help us understand the value of your house. And then we can talk about how that asset's going to be split and exactly what mortgages you qualify for. So qualifying for a mortgage, how do we do that? So we're going to look at credit. We're going to look at income. If there's going to be any support, we look at that. We put all of that information together, and that's how a lender looks at qualifying somebody for a mortgage. So there's a lot of nuance that comes into play here. 70% of divorces involve real estate. So that's a significant amount. So it's really important to understand all of the numbers and where they come from. So one of the things I get asked often is, can we use support to qualify for a mortgage? And the short answer is yes, we can use support to qualify you, but there's lots of rules around it. So again, talking with a lender early so you understand what those rules are. So it's got to be documented. It has to be stable. It has to continue for a certain amount of time. So we want to make sure that your final settlement agreement is written up in a way that we can accomplish the goal that we're trying to accomplish. So it has to be written up properly. For an example, let's say we need the support for 6 months before we can use it as income. We don't want your settlement agreements to say that you're going to refinance in 3 months, right? So again, we have to coordinate and make sure that what we're trying to accomplish is written up properly in your settlement agreements. And one thing I want to mention is monthly income. When we're talking about support, whether it's child support or alimony, monthly income is much, much easier from a lender's perspective than a lump sum. There are some things we can do with a lump sum, but it makes it really that much more difficult. I know there are some cases, excuse me, where a lump sum is a little bit easier for everybody than a monthly payment. But again, talk with a lender early so that we're all on the same page and we understand how to document that in the settlement agreement so that it agrees with how we want to do a mortgage down the road. And credit, we want to protect your credit. Excuse me. We want to look at your credit early. We want to see what debts are in your name. As time goes by, we forget, was the credit card in my name? Was it in my spouse's name? Are we joint? Am I an authorized user? Who's on the mortgage? Those things all come into play with your credit. So you may not have been the financial person in your household, and that's okay. But going forward, you will be, right? You will have your own household post-divorce. And we want to make sure that you understand what debts are in your name, what you're responsible for. And we also want to make sure that all of those debts are accounted for in the final settlement, right? There may be a credit card that's in your name, but it might be the household card for household expenses. And so that needs to be addressed in the final settlement as to who's responsible for those payments. If there are joint accounts that you are on, we need to have a conversation about what's going to happen post-divorce with those accounts, because you don't want to keep them open with your name on something that somebody else can be charging on. But be very careful about closing accounts before you're going to do a mortgage. It will have a negative effect on your credit. So talk with us early so that we can help you through that process and understand when and how to take yourself off of those accounts. And again, what I mentioned, you may not be the financial person in the household, but going forward, you will be. So you need to understand what debts are in your name so that you can make sure that those debts are being paid on time. You have a lot on your plate as you're going through this process, but please don't forget about those debts and making sure that they're paid on time, because again, that will have a huge negative impact on your credit if there are late payments. So be mindful of that. And managing your debt strategically. So when a debt is assigned to somebody else, it can still affect your credit. And perfect example of that, if you own the house jointly for a time, both of your names are still on that debt, but the debt's been assigned to one person, right? Maybe your spouse has been awarded the home and is responsible to make those payments, but your name is still on that debt. Even though the court has ordered that spouse to pay that debt, it is still in your name and can affect your credit. So again, we want to be mindful what accounts have your name on it that could potentially be affected by somebody else. And so in that final settlement, we want to make sure that there are clear timelines for removing somebody from a debt, right? So maybe there's a credit card that has a balance on it and one spouse is awarded that debt to be paid. But if your name is still on it and the other person doesn't pay it, that's going to have a negative impact on your credit. So we want to make sure that all of those things are addressed and clear timelines set in your final settlement. And preserving home equity wisely. A few of the panelists have talked about capital gain tax. So all assets are not equal, meaning that there's some tax implications, right? You may own a home and you may have a lot of equity in it. If you're the spouse wanting to keep the house, keep in mind that if there are gains on that property and you decide to sell it down the road as a single person, you could be up against some capital gains tax that you might have to pay. So we want to make sure that that is addressed up front and taken into consideration with the value of the house. You may have X amount of equity in the house, but there may be some tax implications down the road for it. Keeping those in mind. And on equity buyouts and the timelines, again, if you are the spouse keeping the home and buying out your spouse, there's going to be very clear dates, or there should be very clear dates for when that should happen in your settlements. And that's a legal contract. Once you sign it, that's it. There's no going back. If you don't perform as the settlement requires, you're in contempt of court and your spouse could take you back to court, and vice versa if your spouse isn't performing the way that they should. So making sure that there's clear timelines for equity buyouts in your final settlement. Next slide, budgeting for your new reality, right? Laura talked about this and Rachel talked about this. Understanding what your budget is, right? Post a divorce. It's going to really be imperative that you understand before you sign anything. Create realistic housing budgets. And again, that's something Barb can help you with. That's something Rachel can help you with. That's something I can help you with. We can put those numbers together, of course, just on the mortgage side for me, but understanding what that housing budget looks like. And just because I tell you that you qualify for a mortgage doesn't necessarily mean that's the right thing for you financially and for your financial future. So again, that team effort, we all want to help you have the best outcome post-divorce, and knowing all of that up front is going to be critical. Aligning your legal, your financial, and your lending strategies before you finalize that settlement. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Is you don't have to work with all of us. You don't have to work with each of us. If you have a different attorney or you have a different financial advisor, whatever the case might be, it's beneficial to have your team working together to get you to that finish line and to help you post-divorce and realize, what you're trying to accomplish. So that's what we're here for, to help you get to the finish line and do it with the path of least resistance. So that's it for me. I am going to turn it over to our attorney, Kate.
Thanks, Renee. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Blake. I'm a family law attorney. My practice is I'm licensed in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Some of what we'll talk about tonight is substantive, which means that it's going to be specifically related to New Hampshire. And then some of it's more procedural, meaning it's a process and how things work. And that's a little bit more generic across state lines. My practice encompasses both out-of-court resolution, helping people through the mediation process, collaborative law, direct attorney negotiation, and a component of my practice is also litigation as well. So I think that what is really important for tonight's program is, I know some of you are in the early stages of divorce, is really understanding the divorce process and process options. And the best way to think about this is that anything that is out of court is a voluntary process that you and your spouse must agree to. So out-of-court processes are things like mediation and collaborative law. The court process is what we call litigation. So mediation is where you and your spouse meet with a mediator who is a neutral person who is there to help facilitate the conversation between both of you to help reach decisions that need to be made in order to actually get divorced. Mediator cannot tell you whether what you're agreeing to is a good option for you. They can only just simply tell you what the law says with respect to the substantive process, which we'll get to in a little bit. Collaborative law is a little bit more of a formal structure than mediation. Collaborative law is a process that is out of court as well, where both you and your spouse must have a collaboratively trained attorney who helps you through the process, as well as a neutral person called a coach facilitator. The coach facilitator is really there to help guide emotions, to keep the process in check, and can also work with parents on parenting issues outside of the attorneys, which can be a cost-saving mechanism for people using the collaborative process. The collaborative process, one of the hallmarks is really an agreement not to go to court. You sign something called a participation agreement, which essentially says if this process breaks down, then we have to discharge our collaborative attorneys and hire litigation counsel. And then the other aspect of the divorce process is litigation. So sometimes mediation or collaborative law does not work, in which case, if somebody wants to get divorced, they really have no choice but to file in New Hampshire, it's called a petition for divorce in order to start that divorce process. Once you start the divorce process, there are certain kind of time standards and hearings that get scheduled. As I think Barb mentioned, the 1.25A, which is your mandatory discovery that needs to be produced within so many days of filing, as well as the financial affidavit. So the litigation process can be a little bit more structured. It also allows you to obtain discovery if you need to, because maybe somebody through mediation or collaborative law is not voluntarily producing information. So beyond that 1.25A mandatory discovery, you could ask for written questions to be answered under oath. Those are called interrogatories. You can request documents. You can serve subpoenas. There's a lot of tools that are available to us. And then we talk about the Vesta process, which really can occur in any of these process options. Really what the Vesta process means is, when Mandy mentioned this at the beginning of the call, is building your team and what does that look like? Because I, as a divorce attorney, can explain to you what the law says, how things are likely to happen if we go to court. But what does that really mean for you? There's so many, as you can see from the seminar, so many options and so many things that touch on the divorce world that really getting information and education from experts in their field helps you make these informed decisions. And that's really, truly what Vesta is all about. Another thing to understand is the difference between contested and uncontested. And Lori, our mediator, because she comes at this from a mediation hat, she thinks of contested versus uncontested a lot differently than I do when I wear my litigation hat. And what she often talks about is contested versus uncontested is just because you're in an out-of-court process like mediation doesn't mean that your process might not be contested. It might be contentious, but you still might be able to resolve things out of court. When I think of the words contested versus uncontested, I think, are you in an out-of-court process, in which case I'm going to call that an uncontested divorce, or are you in a litigated process, which I'm going to call a contested divorce? At the end of the day, if one person wants a divorce, they're going to get it in New Hampshire. You don't both need to be on board or in agreement for that divorce to happen. It's also important to know what the right approach is for me. I think that if you are in the early stages and you're interviewing attorneys, you want to make sure that you are meeting with an attorney who knows the different process options. Sometimes I hear from prospective clients that they talk to somebody and the first thing that attorney hears is, oh, you want to get divorced? Okay, we're going to file. This is the information we need from you in order to file. When that may not be the right approach for your specific case, there are nuances that need to be considered, personalities that need to be considered. And so it really is important to walk through process options with an attorney who knows the different options. And I also think it's important to know that one option may not be appropriate for you now, but at some point in the future, it may become appropriate. For instance, sometimes I have people who start in mediation and then there's some type of stumbling block where maybe somebody's not providing information. So then they need to end up filing to have those formal complaints or formal discovery served. And then once we get all that information, maybe we're returning back to the mediation process. So just because you are in one process does not preclude another process option from occurring. Other big questions that I often get, probably the two most common ones, and you certainly should ask this if you're interviewing attorneys, is How long is this going to take and how much is it going to cost? And unfortunately, that is, with respect to cost, not something that I can answer too definitively. With respect to timelines and cost, it will also depend on what process option you use. My kind of general guidelines right now for a timeline is that an out-of-court process like mediation or collaborative law may take anywhere from 2 to 6 months. If you're filing for divorce and ended up in a litigated process, that's on average taking a year to get to a settlement. The vast majority of cases settle at some point along the way. It's a very small percentage of cases that actually end up having a trial where a judge makes a final decision. I'm saying it's a year to settlement. If you actually had a full-blown trial, you might be looking at 2 or more years to actually get your divorce finalized. With respect to cost, the out-of-court processes are often less costly than actually filing in court and having a litigated process. So that's just something to keep in mind. Both parties, if they have their own attorneys, they're responsible for those costs. So it's being mindful about how much your respective attorneys are costing. Now we're going to talk about substantive issues. So this is much more focused on New Hampshire. So in New Hampshire, we have both divorce as well as legal separation. So divorce is essentially saying you and your spouse are no longer married. In a legal separation, you and your spouse remain married, but the court can issue orders or you can agree to orders regarding support and division of assets. You're just still technically married. I see that happen a lot for either cultural reasons or religious reasons that people actually want to just do a legal separation. At a very high level, the things that need to be resolved between you and your spouse are child custody. We call that residential responsibility in New Hampshire. There is a statute that passed, went into effect January of 2025, so it's been on the books for about a year now, and it essentially says that there's a presumption that you and your spouse will have approximately equal parenting time with your children. Then we have child support. Child support in New Hampshire is based on guidelines that the court revisits every few years. It's a very formulaic guidelines that you put in a variety of information, income, health insurance costs, daycare costs, how many children you have, and it will spit out a number, and it's a presumption that is the appropriate number for child support. Separate from child support, we have something called alimony or spousal support, which is based on a statute in New Hampshire. And that statute talks about alimony being 23% of the difference of gross incomes. And generally, the maximum length of time somebody may pay alimony for is about half the length of your marriage. And then the final area that really needs to be addressed, and that's been often be one of the biggest areas, is division of asset and debt. All assets, regardless of how they were acquired, whose name is on, is considered a marital asset. It's a question of how it's divided. New Hampshire is an equitable distribution state. Equitable doesn't mean equal, but generally the longer a marriage goes on, the more likely assets are going to be divided approximately equally. So I know I touched on this before, but I will explain how long does a divorce take. So when we talk about an uncontested divorce, that's a joint petition where you have your final decree that you're filing with the court. And that can take 30 to 60 days for the judge to review all that paperwork and sign off on it. So even though you've actually reached a final decision or final agreement, there's still a bit of a time before it actually gets finalized with the court. And then separately, that contested divorce that I mentioned, 6 to 12 months, more likely 12 months on average. Great question I'm also often asked is, should I file first? It really does not matter who files. Whoever files first is technically called the petitioner. The person who is on the receiving end of it is called the respondent. It doesn't make any difference in terms of dollars and cents, but sometimes people have an emotional aversion or desire to be the one who actually files, but it really does not matter. How much does a divorce cost? I went over that before. And then another great question that I'm often asked is, can I have my attorney's fees paid by my spouse? So the general rule is that you and your spouse are both responsible for your own attorney's fees. Only can you have the other person really pay it as a punitive thing if they've been taking unreasonable litigation tactics or if there's been a delay in producing discovery, really more as a punitive measure. If you don't have access to marital assets in order to pay your attorneys, generally you can get what we call an advance of funds in order to pay for your attorney. And on a very simplistic level, what this means is if at the end of the day you're going to get $100 from this divorce, but you need $5 now in order to pay your attorney's fees, your spouse will give you the $5 now so you can hire your attorney. And then when the divorce is final, you'll get the 95 to bring you up to that full 100 in order to make sure that you're able to pay your attorney's fees, because everybody should have representation. You want to make sure that you understand what it is that you're signing before you sign it, what the legal consequences of that are, as Renee mentioned, making sure that you are able to refinance and able to do so within the time constraints that you're agreeing to. So those types of things are really important to make sure that you've covered as well. I think that this is my last slide, and I am turning it over to Adrian.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to us a little bit more about emotional support. I think after hearing all of that amazing information, your head might be swimming a little bit and you might be feeling a little overwhelmed thinking about all of these different tasks that you need to dive into. But luckily, you know that there's wonderful professionals that can hold your hand through the whole thing. And it's nice that we work together as well, because then you really can get a customized approach. My name is Adrienne Beloin. I just put my information in the chat for you, and I'm a psychotherapist and a transformational coach. I work with couples doing couples therapy. I do single work, working with people at all different angles of relationship intelligence. So that's from dating to breakups to becoming your best self in order to attract the love that you deserve. I work with co parents as a neutral, and I do things like help communication and collaboration around creating parenting plans and problem solving once a parenting plan is in place so that people can have some of those tough discussions as co-parents need to do about making general decisions, but have somebody there to facilitate that communication, help translate between folks. That's what I do. And I'm also happily divorced and a single mom. And I'm really passionate about doing this work. And I've dedicated my practice to relational intelligence work. So, what I wanted to mention to you today is how you can support yourself and the kids if you have them. And there's really three different things I wanted to highlight for you. The first is therapy. Not everybody needs therapy in their divorce, but the kinds of things you want to pay attention to in case you do is if you're struggling with safety. So, if you have a safety concern, if you don't feel physically safe or psychologically safe where you're living in this current conflict that you're in around your divorce and making this decision, plotting your next steps, therapy is a really important tool so that you have that neutral guidance and support and a place to really think clearly and know what the resources are. And safety could relate to your children as well. And I wrote third party there on my slide because I wanted to remind you that is one of the strategies that's very helpful if things are complicated for your kids going forward at any point in the future around the divorce stuff or afterwards. You want to think about having them connected to therapy if there is emotional issues and concerns around that. And one of the most practical things beyond the treatment that they'll be getting is the fact that you've got a third party there. So if there is something that pops up that is a he said, she said situation around something that's concerning around parenting and you're not quite sure how to get at it or understand what's happening over at the other parent's home, the third party is really a great spot to bring that concern to. And they have skills to talk with your children confidentially and support you in all of those ways that you might need documentation or support or connection to resources around. Behavioral health stabilization. So if you have any mental health issues, addiction issues, or they come up throughout the course of struggling with divorce, having therapists involved is a way to get that stabilized and making sure that you're prioritizing that alongside of all the legal and other things that you're dealing with. You don't want to lose track or kind of wait on a behavioral health need or an exacerbation you might have. Michelle had mentioned abuse before, and that is certainly one of the more traumatic experiences you could be having as you're considering divorce. And therapy is a place for really relational trauma recovery. So if you've been in a relationship with someone who is manipulative, or you're experiencing a fog about what happened to you, and you're having a lot of physical ailments and other kinds of symptoms related to the post adrenaline period of getting through a divorce and then really processing what's happened and processing what happened during the marriage, trauma recovery is really important. That's work I love doing with people. Coaching is another aspect of what I do, and these are some of the things that you'd get out of a coaching experience, and therapy and coaching can be blended together. One of them is having sovereign boundaries, like appreciating that you're getting divorced for a reason if you're getting divorced, and right away you can start putting some really comfortable independence, privacy, peace boundaries in place so that you can be a separate person and you can start to carve out your separate life and you don't feel so interdependent and connected with someone that you're no longer married with. That's something through coaching that you can learn a lot of strategies on that and understand how to claim more of that peace and not feel as overwhelmed. Co-parenting, there's a lot of strategies there to help co-parents thinking about those best interests of the kids, that legal term, but talking about those things with your co-parent can be difficult if communication wasn't one of your strong suits while you were married. So having coaching around co-parenting, how to deal with the stress, what are the right words to say, how not to offer up more information than you need to a co-parent that can be used against you or a cause for harassment, how to respond appropriately so that you what your rights are and you're taking more of a stance that's more in control for you. Those are some of the strategies that we can talk about to have a successful experience with this. I mentioned relational intelligence. So really what it is, it's the inner work that we all need to be doing at any point in relational distress. It's the inner work of understanding who we are, what our attachment styles are about, what our core wounds are, and becoming a whole person where we can actually be making decisions that are more value aligned with who we are. And that takes some decent reflection and figuring out what our own patterns of relationships are. And hopefully you're becoming someone who can choose differently in love life going forward. So it's like a healing and then a transformation forward so that you can be a different person in relationships, more successful. I like to do legacy building. So legacy is such a fun word that I don't think we use enough. And asking ourselves what we want our legacy to be. I think when we get divorced, we can often feel like our life blew up and everything is falling apart and we don't know what the future holds. And it's an inspirational way of thinking about your own independent decisions about what you want your legacy to be with your children and your new family that you're creating and how you have the opportunity to grow and to be strong and to claim that future for yourself. And this is just a reminder for anyone, even if you're not doing therapy or coaching. I hope you do. I hope you reach out to me. But for community, you just need to appreciate that you need to rebuild and make decisions right away as you're starting separation and making these changes. Think about disclosing what's going on to your kids really honestly. They need to know what's happening. There's a lot of age appropriate ways to do that. That's something through coaching that you can get a lot of support around, how to talk with them, even having discussions like that facilitated, talking with your family and friends, and something you can do right away just to give yourself some space around talking about something that you've probably kept quiet from certainly your kids and probably your family and friends to some degree is you can prioritize the what is happening over the why it's happening. People don't need to know the why. People can usually appreciate that you're not comfortable talking about the why or you need some space with that. But what's happening is really important because you want people to know what you and your family are going through. You want to be able to enlist a village of people, asking those other parents, can you pick up these kids after this thing? Can they carpool with you? I'm going through something. And having those other trusted adults and people that care about your kids and care about you and your neighborhood, those folks are going to be gold to you. Like you're going to be able to lean on them in ways that you might have previously leaned on your partner, and you don't want to do that right now. It's an uncomfortable situation. You want to set yourself up in a new way. So asking for help and putting yourself out there, creating divorce connections. You're not alone. It's probably good to be talking with other people that have gone through this experience so that you can appreciate that you're not alone in how you feel or what's happening to you and get that peace of mind about how their lives have changed in a positive way. And collecting new routines and activities and creating the new normal right away for your kids and for you. Nothing's going to be the same. and you need to go ahead and mourn if you need to, but move on into the parts where you really carve that out for yourself. And I have a little sticky on there just as a reminder that divorce does not determine the impact on your kids. You do. So it's been well researched and understood that it's a stressor to be divorced and to have kids who are going through divorce. It's no doubt a huge stressor for them. It's an adverse childhood experience, but it does not have to have a poor outcome on their mental health or their ability to thrive as adults or as kids. So the thing that really determines that, and you only need one safe, competent, present, healthy parent. And even if you're only doing your parenting 50% of the time, you will have 100% impact on being able to protect them, to monitor their needs, and to connect them to the resources they need and be there for them. And show them a model of what is healthy. And you certainly can't do that in an unhealthy marriage. So I hope that's inspirational. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Adrian. Very good information. Loved it. So I know we had a few questions in the Q&A that have been answered. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to put them quickly in the chat. Sorry, in the Q&A. Otherwise, as Mandy, our concierge, mentioned, she is going to be reaching out to you in the next day or two to check in and see if you would like any introductions to any of the panelists tonight. And so if you have further questions, most of us, I think, offer consultations for free for an initial consult. If anyone has anything else, otherwise, thank you for joining us tonight and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Good night, everyone.